Good evening and welcome. Let's see where we are. We're going to be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Lamar.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamar. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton. Here. Mr. Doré. Here. Ms. Green.
Here.
Mr. Howard. Mr. Lamar. Here. Mr. Levinstein.
Here.
Ms. Mineo.
Here.
Mr. Stridiron. Here. Mr. Walker.
Here.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby recesses into executive session for the following purpose. Matter made confidential under FERPA, employment history of particular individuals, employment history of particular corporations, matters leading to the employment of particular individuals, the review of programs and placements of students with disabilities, collective bargaining under the Taylor Law, and to obtain advice from legal counsel. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Doré. Yes. Ms. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Lamar.
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein. Yes. Ms. Mineo.
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron. Yes. Mr. Walker.
Yes.
Ms. Burton.
Thank you. See you in about an hour. Thank you for your patience. I'm so sorry. We were having a little technical difficulty. So we're back, and I apologize for the lateness. Right now, we are at the section of the agenda for comments on public discussion and comments on agenda items. Please refer to the regulations regarding discussion and comments. Right now, we have no one signed up. Would anybody in the audience like to speak about agenda items only? Thank you. We're going to move on to our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Manning Campbell.
Thank you. Good evening, trustees, members of the community, cabinet. Thank you so much for being here. Just want to share some highlights for this week. So this past week, we had the esteemed honor of having the New York State Commissioner of Education, Dr. Betty Rosa, join us for the first day of school. She visited Meadow Hill School, NFA main campus. It was an honor to have the commissioner who chose Newburgh. We do have almost 800 school districts in the state, and we were fortunate enough to have her here with us. So kudos to her for joining us, and we're looking forward to more partnership from the state. On Thursday, Regent Dr. Fran Wills helped us to ring in the school year with kindergarten, 8th grade, and 12th grade scholars. Each student shared a goal that they have for this school year. Dr. Wills also visited NFA West Campus for a student-led tour. We rang in the bell at Meadow Hill School on Thursday morning, so that was also really dynamic. Students, families, faculty, and staff seemed in good spirits and excited for a new school year. The buildings were exceptionally clean, so kudos to our custodial and maintenance staff. The floors all seemed especially shiny and polished as well. We received a lot of feedback about the student cell phone policy while we were visiting schools the first week. Students were respectful with their feedback and were doing their best to follow the updated guidelines. I will also mention that we couldn't help but notice more students engaged in conversations during unstructured times, and we're hearing reports of students paying better attention during class instruction. You should know that our students are civically engaged and are using their voice via a petition that has been signed by 907 students thus far. Talk about agency. Over the weekend, 100 alternate stop requests were updated. Advertising an earlier deadline for those requests aided in a more efficient process this school year. They are still coming in, but not in the same amount as previous years. So thank you to our transportation department. Feedback received and some areas that we need to improve. There was an altercation at an athletic event between two students prior to the first day of school. The issue is currently being investigated and addressed in accordance with our code of conduct. Moving forward, tickets will be sold to students in good standing only, which is 85% attendance or better. No tickets will be sold at the door. Middle school students and younger can attend, thank you, if they are accompanied by their parent. You're welcome. Our registration department has been more efficient than ever before. Our teams are working as quickly and as diligently as possible. I have to tell you, they're here until really late at night, working and processing and also coming in on the weekends. So thank you to those folks as well. We receive approximately 30 to 40 new applications each day. The review process may take time as documents that are critical for the child's safety are reviewed and confirmed. Once applicants are reviewed, students are placed within 24 hours. School bus routes and schedules will continue to be adjusted throughout the first few weeks. The first few days, we saw some delays. As we know, the rain did not help us on the first day of school. And weather conditions, and because our students and families took a little extra time to identify their bus company and number, meet the driver, and board the bus, we knew that that took a little bit more time. So thank you for working with us, as we know we did have some delays. As we all know, there are also 3 tiers. So if there is a delay in one, it causes a domino effect for the remaining tiers. And our transportation department is also working hard to ensure that this is resolved efficiently. Families should also check the district website every night at 6 p.m. for adjustments to their schedule. As more people are placed, more stops are added. So there may be some changes within the first few weeks, so please bear with us. Non-public school students who missed the deadline to request transportation are being processed. The deadline is April 1st each year per NYSED regulation. 3 notifications were shared to make families aware of the deadline. Non-public school students who missed the deadline will be picked up from an established bus stop near their home address or from a central location. Looking ahead, students will be invited to become representatives for their buildings. These groups of students will discuss important topics, share feedback, generate ideas, and collaborate on putting those ideas into practice. We hope that they will also present to you at Board of Education meetings in the near future. A color system is being added to elementary school buses, which will help students quickly identify a school bus going to their school so they can board quickly and confidentially. We're going to continue to advertise deadlines for registration and transportation to allow for ample time for adjustments to be made prior to the school year beginning. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Board members, questions, comments?
Sorry. I need to have the slideshow up.
Actually, I do have one question.
You do?
I do have one question.
Okay, Mr. Lamar.
As it relates, it's not specifically what you said, but under, in this section of the agenda, it has listed the NECSD reopening guidebook, and in there it mentions on the health and safety page, ventilation, and this has been something that I've harped on for a couple of years now. Aside from MERV 13 filters, have there been any other upgrades made to the ventilation in the buildings?
Andy isn't here.
Not here.
Mr. Ford, can you answer that, or should we get back to Mr. Lamar?
Let's get back.
Okay. Anything other than, Mr. Lamar, how about they're going to get back to you on that, okay?
Where's David? Ready? So tonight we've asked Mr. Shaw to give us a presentation, a public presentation on student discipline under the Code of Conduct. We ask that you save your questions until the end of the presentation.
Good evening, board members, administration, and members of the school community. I'm just waiting for a slideshow to be presented on the screen.
While we're waiting, I just want to say how thrilled and pleased I am that we have more members of the community in the auditorium, so kudos to you. Thank you so much.
Tonight we're going to cover the Code of Conduct as it relates to student discipline in Newburgh. So when we think about where the Code of Conduct comes from in legal origin, it addresses the right to a free public school education that's guaranteed by the New York State Constitution to the children who attend our schools and other schools in the state. And there are corresponding provisions in the education law that deal with the right to attend between 5 and 21. And there are also the compulsory ed ages between 6 and 16 that the district must monitor. So by the Constitution and the statutes, that creates a property interest in the children in their right to an education. I just did something wrong here. Okay, so now we're dealing with due process and what has to be done before a student may be suspended from their right to an education. So there's a seminal United States Supreme Court case that's from 1975 that describes the rigor of the suspension process that's imposed upon every public school in the country. And we also have in New York a statutory provision, Section 3214 of the Ed Law. So you may recall at the turn of this century, in 2000, Project SAVE legislation was introduced. The district has a very active Project SAVE committee. They review the provisions of the Code of Conduct at least annually. And the purpose is to promote safer, more effective learning environments for the students. And all schools must have a safety plan. There's a district-wide plan. There's also building level plans and emergency responses that are part of it. Instruction in civility, citizenship, character, and violence prevention are part of Project SAVE and its initiatives. There's also a uniform violent incident reporting requirement so that administration from the building level to central office can observe exactly where the incidents occur, how to go about remediating it, and there's also reporting to the state. So the Code of Conduct must include provisions for consequences, and our Code of Conduct is on the website. And Section 3214 of the Education Law is modeled after Fifth Amendment due process that's extended by the 14th Amendment to the states. And New York, of course, makes things a little more difficult than the federal standards. Nevertheless, the district does meet the rigors of both the federal and the state standards. So the key concepts in terms of federal due process is that there is an initial confrontation between a suspending authority and the student. And then there's also an elaborate long-term suspension due process hearing that's required. And in New York, that has to be brought to conclusion within 5 school days of the suspension. Federally, you'd be allowed 10 days, but in New York, it's 5 days. Project SAVE also introduced for the first time teacher suspension, I'll call it, or actually it's called removal authority, to remove students from the classroom who are deemed to be disruptive. They must substantially disrupt the educational process or substantially interfere with the teacher's authority over the classroom. So that was not part of our law until the year 2001 when Project SAVE went into effect. So within the commissioner's regulations, it indicates a mandate that if the teacher's authority over the classroom is interfered with on 4 or more occasions during a semester or 3 or more occasions during a trimester, not only would removals have occurred, but an automatic suspension must take place. So all of this is documented and monitored by the district. So under Section 3214 of the Ed Law, who has the authority to suspend students? Building principals, the superintendent, the Board of Education, and there can be an acting principal in a building with suspension authority if the principal isn't in the building. Now, based upon the right of confrontation, realistically, it's just the building principal and the super who could do that federal initial confrontation with a student to bring about an immediate suspension. The 14th Amendment also carries through from the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution substantive due process. And that essentially means that in order for a student to be subject to suspension, there has to be a clearly stated rational basis. The infractions have to be rational and well stated so that the students are on notice of what they may be suspended for. And the Newburgh Code of Conduct defines what is actionable misconduct. New York law does not allow for a physical punishment of students. There's both a regent's rule and a commissioner's regulation that say the same thing for some reason. And basically, they will state that prior to there being a physical force exerted on a student, there must be a verbal command given to cease and desist. If that doesn't work, then there can be restraint to protect the student from himself, herself, or themselves. Physical force to restrain, to protect the student, others, or property. So that's what New York law allows. The 14th Amendment also has an equal protection clause. And that means that if there are the same infractions committed, the same discipline should be meted out. Now, there are some students who have a past disciplinary record. That would be a reason for differentiated discipline. There's also the question of suspension from privilege activities, sports, extracurricular activities. That requires less due process because there aren't the rights that are established by the state constitution or state statute. The Project SAVE legislation also introduced something that isn't true under federal law, and that is there are two types of suspension. There's immediate suspension and there's proposed suspension that has to await an opportunity for the parent to consult with the principal before the days of suspension can begin. Now, for immediate suspension, that's limited to where a student poses a continuing danger to persons or property or an ongoing threat of disruption. So when the principals are considering a suspension, they have to think in terms of these two definitions and then to proceed accordingly. So under the Goss versus Lopez mandates, in order for a student to be suspended, there must be a face-to-face interview of the student by a suspending authority. Almost always it's going to be the building principal. If for any reason the student isn't accessible, the building principal has to try to have this interview with the student as soon as practicable. It could be telephone or virtually. Assistant principals do not have suspension authority under New York law. And the suspending authority, the principal would explain the charges, give the student then and there a chance to state their side of the story. If there's an alibi that's given, the alibi has to be reviewed. So if the student says, I wasn't in a fight on the 3rd floor, I was in the physics lab on the 4th floor, the physics lab person can be called and check out the alibi. So all of that is part of federal due process that we must abide by. So the principal's suspension authority is limited to 5 school days. And there's a commissioner's regulation at 100.2L4 that describes the manner in which very quickly the parents have to be advised in writing by a letter regarding the suspension and the right to a preliminary conference with the principal. There also has to be a phone contact that's attempted in order to meet the requirements of that regulation. So the students and parents are entitled to this informal conference notice, and at that time there may be a requirement to have complaining witnesses who would be confronted. In many instances, the complaining witness will be an adult, will be an administrator, could be the principal, and very occasionally it might be another student, but there is the right to that confrontation unless there would be danger to the student, to the offended student, based upon the actions of the offending student. Then it may be possible to continue with the principal's suspension without that kind of a confrontation. And this should take place as soon as practicable, usually within 24 hours. And if it doesn't take place because the parent doesn't ask for it, then the discipline can be meted out. So if a suspension is deemed to be founded by the principal, then a disciplinary letter may be added to the student's pupil personnel file, and then the rest of the discipline, if it's more than the time of that preliminary meeting right, will be served. That'll be the time served. And in certain cases, there'll be a demand for a superintendent's long-term suspension hearing for suspensions beyond 5 days. So charges would be drafted that would put the parent and the students on notice of the underlying transaction that they would have to defend at the superintendent's hearing. So at the hearing, and the Code of Conduct provides, charges are read aloud to the student. The student is given an opportunity to admit to the charges. They're told about their right that they can invoke not to give testimony. If admissions were made by the student before the hearing, the person to whom they were made may testify. There could be other witnesses presented. Also, witness statements may be presented at the superintendent's long-term suspension hearing. So at the hearing, it's held in 2 parts. First is a determination of guilt or innocence on the charges. And this is based upon substantial and substantiated evidence. And the standard that's usually referred to in these proceedings is a preponderance of the credible evidence, which is the typical civil standard burden of proof. And then there is a penalty phase once guilt has been found. For students with educational disabilities, if guilt is found at the first part of the hearing, then they're entitled to what's referred to as a manifestation team review prior to the penalty phase. And the manifestation team, or it could be a full CSE, would determine if the conduct was a result of the student's disability or the district's failure to implement the IEP. If the answer is yes, there cannot be a disciplinary penalty that is assigned. Now, in 1997, under the federal law IDEA, there were exceptions carved out where the finding was that the infraction is a manifestation of the disability. And in those cases of weapons, drugs, or serious assault, there could be a 45-day, up to 45 days removal from the usual placement to an interim alternative educational setting. And if there are persistent issues regarding the fact that it would be unsafe to have the child in an educational setting from which they were suspended, there may be recourse into the courts, or there could be a hearing under Part 201 of the Commissioner's regulations based upon dangerousness. That's Section 201.8 of the Commissioner's regulations. Also at the hearing, there may be a past disciplinary record that could be introduced, and that would differentiate what the discipline might be for that student versus another student who didn't have a past disciplinary record. So that can be contested at the hearing, but that which is not contested could be introduced to augment a penalty. There is an exception for students with disabilities that if there hadn't been a manifestation determination made for the past disciplinary events, they may not be considered in meting out discipline. Then there are appeals that are permissible under the Code of Conduct. So the short-term principal suspension may be appealed to the superintendent. An appeal from the superintendent's hearing would go to the Board of Ed. That has a 30-day time limit for bringing that appeal. So the Board of Education, when it's hearing an appeal, is a quasi-judicial body, and they must consider only the transcript or digital recording of the proceedings, the exhibits, the hearing officer's recommendation, the superintendent's decision. If there are legal arguments presented in writing, they would be part of the record. There may be an appeal document that's submitted, often a letter, and there are no personal appearances before the board. But the key note here is that the board members should not have extraneous knowledge regarding the underlying events, and that may not be a consideration in determining an appeal. So the Code of Conduct is a very elaborate document. It's a long read to go through the whole code. However, here we look at the key components. And at page 14, you'll see that there's a listing of supports and intervention options for the benefit of the children. There's also a listing of disciplinary response options for the teachers, for administration, and for the board. There are 4 levels of discipline under the code, and they are spelled out at page 17. And as I mentioned before, you would expect the code to have specific infractions. Well, pages 17 to 28 and then 52 and 53 describe those specific infractions. And also at page 29, there's a matrix of interventions and responses that outlines who among school personnel may mete out certain disciplines. So it'll go from the teacher to the administrators, principals, to the superintendent, and then to the board. Okay, so that's the overview. I'm happy to take your questions.
Board members, questions or comments? Mr. Stradone.
So back in the beginning of the presentation, you had outlined some disruptive student removal process where you had, I believe, said 4 times in a trimester would trigger an automatic suspension.
4 times in a semester, 3 times in a trimester. You know, if it rose to the level of that definition of disruptiveness or violating the authority of the teacher, and the teacher has already executed those first 4 or first 3 removals, then there's an automatic suspension that's required that could be meted out by the principal.
Is that automatic suspension for 4 times per teacher, or is it 4 times for any teacher during the semester?
It's actually based upon the student's conduct. You could arguably have 3 children in a classroom, all of whom are disruptive, who could be removed by that teacher. So, you know, they could be removed 3 times. 3 students would be 9 removals or 12 removals. So it's about the relationship between the teacher and the student who is going to be removed.
Mr. Stradone, can you repeat that question because I'm not sure that.
So I wanted to make sure that it was clear that it's 4 times in a semester for 1 student. So if a student gets removed from 4 different classrooms, that triggers an automatic suspension.
No, no, it's that teacher's classroom. This is the student and the teacher in their classroom for disruptive events that I've identified as the teacher. Then there must be a suspension attendant to the removals.
So you could have 5 teachers removing the student 3 times each, and the student still wouldn't be automatically suspended.
The one student going through the secondary schedule with different
Yes.
teachers? Yes.
Okay. So recently, the board was provided information that was first person about a specific school where none of these things were followed. That the students were disruptive in the classroom, they were removed multiple times, sent back to the classrooms. Students were not suspended after violent attacks on students and staff. What has changed for this year to make sure that doesn't happen again? Are we going to follow the code of conduct to protect everybody, or is it going to be business as usual?
Dr. Manning Campbell.
Thank you so much. We are following the code of conduct to make sure that we're adhering to the code of conduct for every single student in every single situation. We're not going to arbitrarily determine who gets to be suspended based on other circumstances. Onyx Peterson.
I also just want to be clear with the board. The information that was provided last year, what Mr. Shaw is referring to is safe removals. They have to be founded, so students still have due process, and they have to go through the process of making it a safe removal. And the information that was given was based on incidents. It's not. It's each incident. So what was reported as described in the behavioral forum was individual incidents. When a student is removed by a SAFE, students have to be afforded due process, and it could be determined that that incident with the teacher was not disruptive and was not deemed a SAFE removal.
Brings up an important point that the code of conduct actually describes pretty elaborate due process for teacher removal. So if the teacher, for example, doesn't follow that, the removal may not occur. So everyone has to be aware of their role and what the requisites are for the process to work.
Do you have another question?
It's just a follow-up to
Okay,
that.
and then I'll get to Mr. Walker and then Mr. Lamar.
So if a student is removed by one of the staff members, and then they get immediately sent back to the classroom, how are they going to know why the student was sent back, and will the original removal be documented someplace so that if you have a student that's removed, say, 20 times from a class in a semester, but every single time they get sent back and the removal is invalidated, is that going to be documented someplace so that you can see a pattern?
The code of conduct indicates what the process is supposed to be, so they should be following exactly what's there.
Mr. Stern, are you asking for like a grid or some kind of chart that we keep track of?
It should always be kept track of, because you want to see a pattern on both ends. You want to see a pattern if a student is disruptive and the authority in the building just, hey, go back to class, everything's going to be fine. And then the rest of the children in the classroom are being disrupted. You're taking away the students that are trying to learn their right to a free and fair education. So I want to make sure it works on both ends.
So I know that Onyx, thank you. I know that Ms. Peterson would also like to respond, but yes, there is a place and there are systems in place in the building to ensure that not only the disrupted, but the disruptive also receive support. So it's important for us to also document so we can ensure that that student is also receiving supports to ensure that that student could be back in the classroom, and we can also make sure that we have supports and services to support that student. But You're welcome. Ms. Peterson.
Ms. Peterson?
So within our safe school system, we worked really collaboratively with the NTA about 2 years ago to make sure the referral and the documentation process laid with the teacher. So if there is a disruptive and a referral is to be written, a teacher must submit a referral. Again, students still receive due process that is handled by the administrators. So that's input into the system, the investigation ensued, all of that is documented within our Safe Schools program.
Mr. Walker? Mr. Lamar?
Just straight up, are teachers and administrators being discouraged from reporting acts of violence?
Was that a question for me? Absolutely not. Because we're here to really educate the whole child in a safe environment, and a safe environment means for staff members and students. So we're here to encourage safety for everyone, and so there's been no discouragement of any incidents of violence, because we can't help if we don't know. Thank you.
Just real quick follow. Is there a way for us to be able to view the DASA information and DASA reports and suspension data to compare?
Absolutely. You're welcome. We'll work on it. I don't want to say tomorrow because we'll pull data. So we'll do it as soon as possible for you. You're welcome.
Mr. Walker?
Pardon me, sir. Can you turn on your mic?
Oh, that one. But I know that I'm pretty sure that there are people who also want to know what is due process when their child is involved with, let's say, some type of altercation with a teacher, or a teacher has said something that the child has found offensive. What is the due process of that? Because I think that's all linked into this as well. You know? When does it go to a judge? Why would it go to a judge? What is the responsibility as the Board of Education, as a steward, if you have this type of thing going on in the community or within the school system? All right. The second thing,
Why don't you let Mr. Shaw answer?
not a problem.
Okay, so that's covered under different provisions of the education law. For a probationary teacher, there isn't much due process at all, and you can discipline fairly freely. For tenured faculty members, there's a very elaborate due process that's even more elaborate than the process for suspending students.
Would a new teacher be given this type of information just like we're getting it now? Or would it just be given a pamphlet and, good luck? Is it reviewed with the teacher so that he or she understands what her responsibilities are in the classroom, particularly with what might come out of his or her mouth? Is there a training process, or is it just given?
So not only are all teachers required, newly certified teachers, to go through a SAVE course and a certification, it's a workshop, as well as we have a really robust, dynamic, awesome, and amazing new teacher orientation program. And so those are the types of things that are reviewed with new teachers to the district. So that is happening, and the administrators do provide training for code of conduct.
Pardon me, sir. Can you turn on your mic?
Thank you. The reason that I bring this up is because about 2 weeks ago, I was fortunate to participate in a workshop with new teachers. And many of them had this question, like, what's my due process? Those weren't their exact words, but what's my due process? You know, sometimes a teacher may see something that's totally may have been out of control, but could have been a mistake. Or it could have been rampant and violent, and as it wants to be. They want to know, well, what happens? I think a parent would want to know what happens. What's the process? So I can see it and I can put it into action. The other thing was they were also concerned about training in breaking up a fight. And I don't know if they've ever gotten that. I never saw the 40-odd one in the years I taught. It's just like we depend upon the teachers to judge things and then jump in. But you can't do that now because the teachers can get hurt. And there's all kinds of things, particularly, with, let's say, a male teacher breaking up a female fight. So I think these are things that, teachers should be given some detail of, and also the community as well, so we can know that those bases are covered. And what's the process? As my kid tells me his teacher did something, what's the process? I don't just drive up to the school and go, where's Mr. So-and-so? That's it.
Go ahead, Dr. McCann.
So I hear you. And so as we are doing our new teacher training workshops, we will ensure that those courses are revisited. I want to also say to you that one of the things that we're ensuring that we're doing this year is really moving towards reestablishing, reconnecting, because we know that COVID did a lot in terms of disconnecting students and faculty and families. But we are looking at re-engaging, welcoming environments, and we know that in a welcoming and engaging environment in a classroom, you know your students, you know when things are not going well, you know that if you're standing at the door greeting students, you can tell right away that that student needs some additional support, that student is off. And one of the things that we're working on thus far is having trauma-informed practices. And I know that our security officers are going to also receive that training. So we hear you and we understand, and it's definitely necessary. So that's something that we'll continue to build out. Thank you.
Ms. Burton?
So, Mr. Shaw, just clarification. In regards to when a student is removed from the classroom and then interviewed, or, they give their story to the principal, at what point should or should not, at that point, the parent is not necessarily has to be there. Is that so? Because I saw it was something around within 24 hours, both have to be contacted. But at that point of contact, in terms of an adult interviewing a student, when does the parent, is it only within that 24 hour that the parent has to be contacted?
That's correct. And at the time of the initial interview between, let's say, the principal and the student, there isn't a requirement to notify the parent before that occurs.
There
is not. The parental notification under the regulation is within 24 hours, either by hand delivering a letter that explains everything and the right to the principal's conference, or overnight mail. First-class mail is illegal. It has to be overnight mail, personally delivered, and also an attempt to read the letter to the parent, whether it's the immediate suspension letter or the proposed suspension letter.
And is that any grade? So
Say
a
that
third
again?
grader, a second grader can be interviewed without the parent?
Yes.
All right, so the student then can not answer any questions and suggest to the, for better, I guess, the principal, that I need my parent called.
Well, the student has the right
Right.
not to answer, but then there's no pushback against what's being said by the principal as to what the principal thought happened.
So if a student at that time is not coming forth with their story in terms of what happened, but there is other students that were interviewed, can the process continue on without the student's story at that given time? Does the due process have to then go to the next level? Will it, at that point, what can the principal do?
I think the nuance in the Project SAVE legislation, which indicates that many of these suspensions should be proposed, which means the student may be confronted, but not suspended until after the parent receives the letter, the opportunity to meet with the principal. But for the very disruptive, dangerous students, they can be immediately suspended, and then their parents the opportunity within 24 hours or so to come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Board members, any other questions for, I'm going to do Mr. Duray, and then I'll do Mr. Stern.
You mentioned a lot about the teacher training, which is excellent. It seems we would have an exposure with the substitute teachers. What do they get?
So we are rebuilding our substitute program. And not only is that one of the things that's really important, but also emergency procedures. The substitute should also be trained in those types of procedures. So absolutely. So we are rebuilding. We're working with the union to ensure that those practices are in place, because we know that, things certainly happen in unstructured times, as well as with folks who are not familiar with our students.
Mr. Stradar.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I know that for years, the students have been uncomfortable using the restrooms in the middle and the high schools because they know that the facilities are not a safer environment as they could be, because the lack of monitoring, the school security is stretched because they're dealing with other issues, and the bathrooms and then the hallways, while the class is being given, the hallway monitoring is lacking. What has been done since July 1st to address the monitoring of the bathrooms and the hallways, knowing that we don't have enough people in the buildings to see every single place?
So I think I mentioned before about welcoming and affirming cultures and environments. And unless we have welcoming and affirming and supportive environments, we can have one security guard for one student. So it is cultural, and I can tell you that since being here on July 1st, walking into the buildings, having conversations with teachers, with faculty, there's really a move to be student-centered, more student-centered, particularly after being disconnected because of the pandemic. Not to say that we weren't doing it before, but there's more of an emphasis, and we see it as we're walking through the buildings. So I don't get that feeling of unsafe. And I have to be honest with you, I've been meeting weekly since July with teachers, families, students, and that's never been raised to me in terms of what's happening moving forward. What I hear, there's in the air is a buzz and an excitement to be back in schools. There's been zero reports of feeling unsafe or any negativity. I have to tell you, Mr. Stradiron, it's been really a good opening, a really great start, and really just understanding that we're going to do what we need to do to get back to a place of teaching and learning and safety.
I understand the positivity. I understand the point of view. There are issues in the buildings that happen every day. And you can have a positive outlook, but if a kid's getting their head bashed in, how is that being addressed if we don't have the staff to intervene in time for that student? It only takes one incident. We had an incident that happened before school started. There was no security there because they were stretched. It was an event. How does that student feel? Was that, I can't talk about this specific incident, but how do students address those situations where they go to the bathrooms and they see kids hanging out in there and then they can't go? The bathrooms are not monitored. I brought up many times that we should hire monitors for the bathrooms and the hallways because we don't have enough staff. If you're saying that we don't need that, then that's your position, because you're going to say that the culture is different.
So you talked about two different events. You talked about an event that happened that we won't get into specifics, and I can speak differently about, the point of view that you also presented. There are some other facets to that event that occurred, right? In terms of what I think as an educator, what's necessary and required, I holistically believe that if we have schools that are culturally responsive and safe, and students feel safe, and staff members feel safe, and families feel safe of sending their children into the building, yes, it's going to take some time. I don't disagree. I will not say that I disagree with hall monitors. I've worked in districts where we've had some and where we have not had any. But is that the answer? More security? I don't know if I agree with that at this time. I do strongly believe that if we have a shift in our culture and we have some positive outcomes and interactions within our schools and just have some high expectations, then we can start to see a shift. Will it happen overnight? Absolutely not. Is it only happening here? Absolutely not. If we look nationally, it's an environment it's what's happening nationwide. Will we fix it overnight? We're going to do our very best, and I can tell you that thus far, we've seen some really positive outcomes. And I really want to applaud and recognize the staff members and students who are really working towards that.
Ms. Burton?
Thank you for that. And I believe everyone wants to feel safe, staff and students. A couple of weeks ago when our safety plan was presented, I asked the question, did anyone talk to the students? That's why we're here, right? And I would much rather hear from them, on an ongoing basis. And I think that does come from, if you're walking into the classroom, just tonight an adult said, hey, I'm not in a great mood today, right? But let's just say a kid comes in and your kid, right? And so maybe that does transfer over to maybe need to go see your school counselor. Maybe need to go see someone. Maybe you need to go see someone right now. Or maybe how can I help you right now? But and we're going to get into it a little bit more, I am anyway, in terms of student voice, right? And, with those relationships, students will tell you. They'll tell you what's going on. So we don't have to hear it, coming out of, someone else's mouth. We'll hear it from them. If they don't feel safe going into the bathroom, they should be able to go to somebody and tell and say, there's stuff going on in the bathroom and it needs to be addressed because I don't feel safe. But it's exactly right. We have to create those environments and we have to create the opportunities for young people to have relationships with adults that they can sit down and they can talk to about this stuff. And that can be teachers, that can be anyone, that can be a security guard, that can be anyone, but they need those opportunities.
Thank you. And to that point, something that we're doing this year in particular in terms of safety, and I think this really ties back into what you were trying to get at, Mr. Stradian, in terms of the history. But I've asked Mr. Bayer to meet with, and we'll have a schedule of the pupil personnel staff going into classrooms. We'll have a calendar perhaps by the end of the week, and we'll share that calendar with you. I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about what my ask has been about that.
So the expectation is that we are much more customized, that we're proactive, that we let students know up front what's available, that we go into classrooms and describe for them what's available throughout the building, and who are their support systems, what they can offer, and how they would be able to access that. So we're being much more intentional in trying to get out in front of this and not waiting until things begin to kind of start to happen. I do want to mention, in addition to that, we are really building out the restorative practice process, which we've talked about here. I'm really excited. The energy that Dr. Manning described pervaded 2 days of restorative practice training this summer. We had a training of teachers at the end of August. I've never felt that kind of energy in a number of years. Teachers who were really excited at the idea of really using these practices on a consistent basis. And then we trained our people personnel staff one of the 2 days during the Superintendent's Conference Day. And again, very powerful, very excited. It was really 2 days because they then met the following day. And each of the buildings is developing an action plan about how that particular strategy will be incorporated. So we're trying to really be broad-based here and make sure that we're proactive, that we're providing supports to prevent these issues, and if they do occur, to make sure that we provide support to kids and some corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Board members, any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Mr. Lamar?
What would be required for us to hire more monitors? I mean, can we make a motion that we hire more monitors for NFA and for the junior high?
We can certainly look at that, but it is a financial impact. But that's something we can certainly look at and have some more options.
There are also areas in NFA where the students know, beyond just the restrooms, where the students know there's no cameras. And if we could have some research done on that by maybe talking to the teachers about it, the teachers know where they are. And the students know there's no cameras, and they go there, and there's things that, you know.
Thank you. I'm sure that they'll take a look at it, and they'll look at the monitor thing and get back to us, okay? Thank you, Mr. Shaw. You have one resolution. Set plan.
Mr. Forget, set plan?
Madam President, we bring to you Resolution 3.3 to approve the 2022-2023 school comprehensive education plans for the TSI schools, specifically Bonneville, Gams, and Heritage.
I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Yes, Ms. Burton.
So in regards to the TSI and the CSI schools, I mean, these plans have been coming before us for a couple of years now since I've been on the board. I only remember maybe hearing one presentation from South Middle School at one point in time. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, so when do we get to know how successful, like last year's, you know, what were the outcomes from last year, and then how does that then lend itself to this new, these new education plans?
Mr. Forget.
So in order for the teams to create their SEPs, they have to do a reflection on the measures of success that they had for last year, and that's what drove the continuation of the plans for this year. Pre-COVID, we were having the building teams, principal and designees come and actually present their plan and share with the board throughout the year the progress that they were making, so that you weren't waiting until September to hear about that. I communicated with the principals on Friday that we're going to bring that back as a requirement, that each of the principals or their designees will be invited to a mid-year presentation for the board to talk about how they're doing on each of their commitments. So you'll get firsthand mid-year an update on these plans, and then we'll get an end-of-the-year progress as well. And again, they are required to do a reflection of the progress they made previous year to design the plan for the current year.
Go ahead, continue.
So I know a lot of times we say these things like TSI schools. So we have parents here and we have community people here. And maybe this is not the best time, but I think it's important that that we at some point in time give the community a presentation on really what is a TSI, what is, comprehensive, what are those, and why? Because, I know why. I know why based on going to SED and SED telling me why, but I don't know why based on an individual school. And so there's very clear indications in some demographics and students, and I think that's important that our community know, particularly since I think it's important that they know.
Thank you for bringing that up. And pre-COVID, we were doing that, and I believe that we should be doing it again. So we'll do a presentation on the accountability status for the district as well as the schools, share that data in community language, and make sure that everyone's on the same page connecting with trying to improve outcomes for all kids. So we will definitely do that.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Thank you. Okay.
This is the last one, okay? So here's the thing. There's a document that talks about guidance on interviewing students. And yet, when you look at these plans, where is the student voice? And I've been on this kick for a long time, where we keep saying student voice, where is the student voice?
In every single one of those plans, because it's a mandate of the design of those plans to do student focus groups and conversations with students, as well as use survey data from students to inform those plans. But there are engaged conversations in the schools, the TSIs and CSIs, to hear from the students their perspective on what's happening in the school, and from their perspective, what's important and what's needed. Each of those schools are required to do that.
Okay, I'm not buying that. Because,
I'm
not buying it because this is a plan that does not include, I know about the panorama surveys. You're not talking about those. Then that should be in these documents. They're listed in terms, and I know there's been other documents where parents' names and students have been listed. And if that's the case, then where is that? It says in there, and in partnership with staff, students, and families. That's very nebulous for me. So I'd like a little bit more substance.
So I think what the question is that on the school leadership team that actually writes the plan, you're asking to see a student name on the school leadership team. And what I was saying was the school leadership team meets with students to engage in conversations to create the plan. But you are specifically asking for us as a district to encourage a student participant on each of the SLTs. We'll take that definitely into consideration. Thank you.
Mr. Forgy, can you, the initials CSI and TSI, could you tell us what they mean so that everybody understands that, please?
Yeah, those are targeted support schools and comprehensive support schools. The CSI schools are the schools that are the highest need in the state. They are the schools that are performing in the lower 5% of the state, and the TSIs are trending in that direction, but we hope to prevent them from reaching that particular area. And when we do the accountability data presentation, we'll share with you the specific indicators that these schools are identified for. It's no longer just ELA and math. there's growth, there's progress, there's chronic absenteeism. There are multiple measures that are used in the accountability system. And ironically, the Board of Regents met yesterday and today, and we are looking at the possibility of a modified system for the 2022-23 school year using 2021 data, but that has not been confirmed yet. But we will do that during the accountability presentation.
Any other questions, board members? Yes, Ms. Green.
I just wanted to state that as a former SLT member at Bombville, students were given surveys in the beginning of the school year to ask how they felt, and that same survey was given to the students at the end of the year, and the school did use that information to see if things had improved or gotten worse. So I'm assuming that all schools do that, but at Bombville, like I said, as a former SLT member, we did do those surveys. And for the kindergarten first and some of the second graders, since they could not, some of them could not verbally write down what their answers were, the teachers would write it down for them, and those surveys were handed in. So we did do that. So the student voices were heard at Bombville.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Dr. Campbell, are you done with your section?
Yes, I
Pardon
am.
me, ma'am, we need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Green? We're voting on 3.3, the comprehensive education plans. Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. DeRay?
That concludes my items. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manning Campbell. We're going to move on to my section, and I have item 4.1 for your consideration. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion on this item? Yes, Mr. Stridiron?
Just one quick question. How do you calculate the minimum average daily attendance? What's the formula?
Mr. Forget?
I'm going to turn that over to Ms. Peterson.
So the average daily attendance for a student is based on if they are present in the school daily. It does not take into account bona fide illnesses, which are sick, which is excused with a parent note.
So
Yes.
if you have a student that attends first period and then cuts second period, does that factor into any of the attendance calculation?
Yes, it does. So recently, we went through the student management system and came up with a report. It's the same report that we use for our eligibility of students that looks at actual minute-to-minute attendance. At the end of each day, we aggregate that attendance to get the specific percentage of average daily attendance.
So
Mr. Forget.
how is this being implemented?
Let Mr. Forget answer your first question. Go ahead.
I just
Your
wanted
second
Ms.
question.
Peterson also to explain the 85% report that's being generated. So there's a report that says these are the eligible, these are the ineligible.
Yes,
Ms.
I do.
Peterson?
So this year, we implemented a 54 eligibility report that administrators and extracurricular or coaches have access to that gives the average daily attendance, and it tells them their exact percentage for all students. That report will be visible to parents shortly. I'm working with the student management system to have that visible on our student portal.
So it's active right now. So every extracurricular activity, coach or it's active right now and they can see it.
So I've met with Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Peach, as well as building level leaders. They have access to the report and they can run the report right now or daily or whenever they choose.
Thank you.
Mr. Lamar?
How is chronic absenteeism defined, and what is the rate of chronic absenteeism in this district?
So
Ms. Peterson?
I heard chronic absenteeism, but I didn't hear the complete question. But I'm also going to be giving an update I'm not sure what the actual question was.
How is chronic absenteeism defined? And what is the rate of chronic absenteeism in the district?
So chronic absenteeism measures if a student has been absent 10% or more for the year. So average daily attendance differs from chronic absenteeism. The exact rates will be reviewed with the board in a public session for a recap for last year. So I'll be going over average daily attendance rates as well as chronic absenteeism attendance rates by all different subpopulations.
Madam President, Ms. Peterson, I believe it's grades 1 up, not kindergarten, correct?
Yes, yes, it's grades 1 and up. Chronic absenteeism is measured.
Mr. Levinstein.
Thank you, Madam President. So this policy, 5100 comprehensive student attendance, what you have on red is added to or changed of the existing policy, correct? Okay, so I would like to suggest that the last sentence be in bold. The principal has the discretion to address any extenuating circumstances. I think that's important. I've always lobbied for that, and I hope that that is to the benefit of the students. Thank you.
Mr. Forget?
At the request of the board, we would consider that. We would follow through with that.
So what would you like from us, Mr. Forget? Want me to survey the board? All right, so I'm going to ask everybody if they would like to bold that last sentence, because it needs to be consensus of the whole board. It's not something that one person is going to do. Okay? Would you like to poll the board, please, Mr. McCoy? It's either yes or no. Bold or not bold, that one sentence. Go ahead.
Mr. Linville, can you put that up on the screen, that attachment? Bottom of page 2. Mr. Levinstein wants to bold that last sentence, Ms. Burton, that says the principal has the discretion to address any extenuating circumstances. That's the question that we're asking, yes or no.
Okay.
Mr. Lamar? Question on the,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
No.
Mr. Stridiron?
No.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton? Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
I'm still confused. What is it that we're actually voting on? I'm so sorry. Are we going to bold something?
Bold the last sentence.
And what,
The last sentence says, in red, the principal has the discretion to address any extenuating circumstances. The question on the floor is, should that be in bold type?
yes.
1, 2, 3, 4. Mrs. Green is 5.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Lamar,
Yay.
we're voting to adopt policy 5100 on the first reading.
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green? Motion carries.
Thank you. That concludes my item. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction Elementary, Mrs. Moriarty.
Thank you, Madam President. Elementary Curriculum Instruction presents items 5.1 and 5.2 as consent agenda.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, sir.
5.2.
Okay, so we'll just separate, we'll do 5.1 first. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion on 5.1? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein? Yes. Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green? Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
We're going to move on to item 5.2. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Yes, Mr. Lamar?
I'd just like a little more information. What's the Learning Forward Conference, and is there going to be some sort of goal with measurable results with this expense we're putting out that the staff will meet after attending it?
Mr. Forget?
Thank you, Madam President. Learning Forward is the previous National Staff Development Council National Conference. It is the premier conference across the country for educators. It incorporates effective practices from school districts across the country, teachers teaching teachers. There are strands of professional learning with regards to school improvement, with regards to coaching, with regards to literacy and math and diversity and cultural competency. And we have been attending this in the past for several years. We sat down as a team and looked at the agenda. We selected our topics together. At the conclusion of each of the days, we sit down as a team and talk about what we learned and what we can turnkey or bring back. So we would be happy to give you a presentation upon our return about what we learned and what we embedded into our practice. Honestly, Mr. Lamar, I've been in education quite a while. This is probably the one conference I would ask every educator to consider going to. It is that powerful.
And just because I've got it down here already, is there an option to attend remotely to save on these travel expenses?
I can check on that. I believe this year they are back full in person, but I can check on that.
Mr. Stridarn, I thought you had your hand up.
I'm just wondering, how do the people get chosen to go on the trip? Because I don't really see, I see one person from, actually, just nobody from a teaching position here.
I believe we have 2 teachers on special assignment that are doing, one teacher on special assignment and the teacher that is running the teacher center participating. So as with anything, anyone that would like to attend a conference in the district speaks to their assistant principal, speaks to their principal, speaks to their director, and they are considered for attending those conferences. This particular conference, I specifically believe in it, and I have seen what happens when we return from it. So I request my team to attend with me. And again, because this provides us with the capacity to come back and work with principals, assistant principals, directors, and others to embed what we learned. Anyone that wants to go to a conference has the opportunity to request to be considered to go to a conference.
Board members, any other questions on 5.2? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Yes. Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mrs. Moriarty. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction Secondary, Ms. Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to present Resolution 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8, and 6.9 and 6.10 for consent agenda.
Thank you. Would any member like to separate out any of these items? Yes, sir.
6.10.
Anyone else separate out any items? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion on items 6.1 through 6.9, please.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion on those items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes. Let's move on to item 6.10, please. I'd like to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or discussion? Yes, sir.
I'd just like to know, other than the name change, what is the difference between AP and college course, and are the grade requirements for are there grade requirements for enrollment in the class?
There are no grade requirements for enrollment in the course, and I'll encourage all of our, I'm sorry, my mic will not go on. And everyone here. I'm just a teacher, so my mom are no requirements for any student to challenge the course. We encourage all of our students to participate in college and AP course enrollment. The curriculum is essentially comparable. There are some elements in the AP course that are not included in the college level instruction. However, it will be covered in the course so that our students may earn the college credit or may challenge the AP exam. We encourage all students who are enrolled to challenge the AP exam.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
And now, all the things are blinking. How lovely. How lovely. It's rolling. Everyone. Okay. Now, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Exceptional Learners, Mr. Baer.
Thank you, Madam President. Exceptional Learners has one item, 7.1, for the board's consideration.
Thank you. I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Burton?
Oh, yeah, no, yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Thank you. That concludes my items.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. We're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Ms. Roaring.
Thank you, Madam President. The Division of Finance presents items 8.1 to 8.11 for consent this evening.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Yes, Mr. Stridarn.
On item 8.8, what kind of special inspections will Tectonic Engineering be performing?
Ms. Roaring?
Tectonic will be performing inspections associated with our capital project work, including soil compaction, steel, concrete, to make sure that all the foundations and things going in place are sound.
So it's up to $100,000 for just 1 year?
Yes, there are multiple tests required for each step in the process.
It's a large number. Can we get an itemized, every time they do a test, can we have it itemized so we can see how many tests they do and what they do? At some point, we have to keep track of these tests.
Ms. Roaring?
During the Facilities Committee project updates, there are updates regarding the project status and the budget status as well.
I would like to keep track of expenditures on testing, if possible.
That's going to be an item on the Facilities Committee?
The Facilities Committee does get budget updates every month on the projects.
So they submit invoices for every test. They should.
Invoices come to us on a monthly basis.
So a monthly basis, they provide?
Yes.
Okay. I definitely would like to see those. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar? Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridarn?
Yes.
Mr. Walker? Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam President. That concludes my items.
Sorry, we're going to move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. McLemore.
Thank you, Madam President. On the Human Resources agenda, I have items 9.1 through 9.12 for your consideration on tonight.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items?
9.4.
I'd like to entertain a motion on 9.1 through 9.12 minus 9.4. Questions or discussion on those items? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré?
We're going to move on to item 9.4. I'd like to entertain a motion, please.
So moved.
Questions or discussion?
I just separate this out to once again ask if parents are aware that they can join the NFA school leadership team. And are there any on it right now, and how did they get there?
Who can answer that question?
Do you want to go ahead and take that?
Mr. Forget?
We can find out that answer for you. NFA is not an identified school in the accountability system, so I honestly don't know. But I will research and get that information. If an invite didn't go out, we will ensure that an invite goes out.
Any other questions on 9.4? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLemore. We're going to move on to the clerk of the board, Mr. McCoy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the approval of the minutes from August 23rd and August 31st, 2022.
Would any member like to separate out any of these items? I'd like to entertain a motion, please. Questions or discussion? Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Levinstein? Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
That concludes my items, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. We're now at the portion of the agenda for public discussion on non-agenda items. Please refer to the procedure sheet, and you have 5 minutes, which is going to go up right now. We have one person signed up, and that's Mrs. Sharna Rainey Blanding.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Please come to the microphone at the podium, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone. As President stated, my name is Sharna Rainey Blanding, and I'm here to formally introduce to you the proposal of the Newburgh Consolidated Charter School. I am the community liaison for the charter school, and to my right behind me is Dr. Willie Cawley, who is the executive director. You should have received a copy of the transmittal and the summary form. If you did not receive it, I do have a copy for you. So I just wanted to formally just introduce who we are.
Thank you. Okay. Would anybody else like to address the board on non-agenda items? I do. Okay, please come up and state your name.
Hi, Courtney Allen. You guys should all know me by now. We've been here before. Just saying hi to everyone. The Parent Alliance is back. We've missed a few meetings, but we're back. And just to say hi and just let you guys know that we still want some answers and we still want to meet and we still are here. So here we are. That's all. That's it. Good night, everyone.
Would anyone else like to address the board? Please come up and state your name, please.
Good evening. My name is Francella Palmer. I see a couple new faces here tonight that haven't seen me before, so they probably don't know my story. On May 11th, my son, Tyler Smith, drew a picture in art class at Gidney Avenue School. Me and you spoke about it. You never got back to me. Well, let's talk about it now. And he was in art class like a normal day. He drew a picture that the art teacher thought was a gun. At that time, she questioned him and then called the school social worker and had him questioned by the social worker as well. The social worker then spoke to the art teacher, my son, and called in me and spoke to myself as well. At that time, the social worker told me that she did not see any area of concern. She let me know that my son was not in any type of trouble. He drew a picture like a 7-year-old would do. My son told him he plays Fortnite. I think we all know now what Fortnite is. These are shooting games that they provide for our children to play on these games, the world does. And Yeah, so she let me know that there was no areas of concern. The picture would come home in my son's book bag. There wasn't any problems moving forward, you know. My son came home from school. The picture was not in his book bag. The next day while I was at work, because I work evenings, normally I wouldn't be here tonight. I left work early. I do a double today. I normally don't get off till 10 o'clock tonight. I am a single mother of 4 children. So you can see I really can't be taken off for the work. But nevertheless, that's neither here nor there. So the picture was not in my son's book bag, so automatically I knew something was off. And then upon the next day, I believe it was, the cops were called to my house to do a check to see if everything was all right. But to my knowledge, there was nothing wrong. And whatever happened, didn't happen at my house. It happened at the school. So why wasn't the cops called to the school? Because I was told there wasn't a problem. So why were they called to my house? And still, no one has gotten back to me on this matter. And I sit here, I send my son back into these same schools with y'all. Me and my son are traumatized, as you can see in my face tonight. And I heard you say something about trauma and moving forward and helping people. Nobody has helped me. Nobody has helped my son. I have been basically told to send my son back into these schools with y'all people, and I'm supposed to trust y'all that nothing will happen again to my son. Who would trust this system, sending their child back in there when the principal is still allowed to operate in this, you know what I'm talking about, because I almost can't hold myself together. The principal is still able to operate in this school district, along with the art teacher that did this, and everybody else who knows that she did it. Y'all sweeping it under the rug. But I ask y'all again tonight, what about my son? What about Tyler? Y'all hurt us, and y'all betrayed us. And y'all have an obligation to hold to the people. Because if we don't send our children into these schools, y'all won't have a job. And I won't rest until y'all do right by my son. Because I'm not even going to say who I spoke to, because we're not supposed to say names. But I spoke to a Caucasian gentleman sitting at this board tonight. And he told me out of his own mouth, he don't even know what he would do if he has a son my son's age, and he don't even know what he would do if this was done to his son. Y'all know it just as well as I know it. If my son was white, this would have never happened. Stop overlooking this matter with my son and address it properly, because y'all wronged my child, and y'all wronged me. And I'm a very strong woman, but what y'all did to my boy is wrong. Now my son keeps telling me he's a good boy. You damn right he's a good boy. And he was a good boy before y'all scarred him. And y'all better fix it. Y'all better fix it. Y'all betrayed me and my son. Yeah, I know you don't care, because you are the one who was supposed to be helping me with this matter. And moving forward, you didn't help me do nothing. Miss Moriarty. She's sitting here, so I don't see why I can't say her name, but y'all can. But that's neither here nor there either. And there's a racist issue in the Newburgh City School District that I have not heard anybody say nothing about either. And I have not heard anybody say nothing about getting it out of here either. And I know you're going to shun me away, just like y'all shunned me away. That was the day after my birthday. My 39th birthday, that is what I got.
Your 5 minutes.
Y'all disrespected my child that I put my life on the line to have.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome. Get the disrespect out of people like that.
Would anybody else like to address the board on non-agenda items? Okay. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting, please. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Lamar?
Yes.
Mr. Levinstein?
Yes.
Ms. Mineo?
Yes.
Mr. Stridiron?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Burton?
Yes.
Mr. Doré? Ms. Green?
Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for a wonderful opening of school, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.